Good evening, everyone. Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm Carrie, Coogan, Deputy Director for the Kansas City Public Library. We're about to get started. Thank you. We are thrilled to continue our Making a Great City series in partnership with the new multi-studio, formerly known as Gould Evans. We began this series back in 2017, and this is our 12th edition of this series. And we're looking to facilitate deeper conversations about smart, healthy city building involving not only city stakeholders and planners and civic leaders and developers, but also community members, entrepreneurs, and community development organizations. We sought, and we still seek, to bring people together to listen, to learn, and to collaborate, to solve problems and to affect change. We want to advance realistic solutions to our country's infrastructure crisis and specifically point Kansas City and our region towards being more productive, more collaborate, and more equitable. We certainly have not done this series alone. This project has benefited from many community sponsors and funders, including the UN Marion Kauffman Foundation, who is also a great sponsor of all of the programs that we do here at the library, the Hall Family Foundation, and First Missouri Bank. And then, of course, there's my great friend and partner in this now 5-year series, Dennis Strait. He's the managing principal of Multi-Studio, and Dennis and his incredible team have been true champions in this collaboration as we work to not just lay out the problems that we face in our region, but more importantly, to try to find solutions to those problems as well. So, we kick off this year's series of programs with the incredible Majora Carter, a real estate developer and urban revitalization specialist from South Bronx, New York. She'll revolve her discussion tonight around her book, Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. The book is on sale out front here, and she will be signing copies after the event tonight. We're also going to be taking questions at the end of the presentation, and we ask that you use the microphones that will be right down here at the end of her talk. And we're also live streaming tonight, so if you have a question for Majora and you're watching from home or somewhere else, if you could submit your question into the chat via YouTube, then we will make sure that your question gets answered here tonight. So thank you all again so much for being here. And now please join me in welcoming Dennis Strait back to the library. Dennis, it's great to have you.
Good evening. It's really good to see everybody out here. We've been on hiatus for the last 2 years because of the pandemic, so it's great to have a chance to get the series back up and running. I wanted to thank the sponsors that have allowed us to keep this program going. Certainly our partnership with the library, but First Missouri Bank and the Hall Family Foundation and the Kauffman Foundation have been great supporters for this effort, and it's greatly appreciated. So we've been on hiatus. I wanted to give you a quick summary of what the series has been about to set the stage for Majora's presentation tonight and also for what we're going to be talking about this fall. As Carrie mentioned, this series is really about helping us all understand how the decisions we make in terms of the development that we choose to do as a city impact our ability to be an actually great city. So let me see here, get the right buttons in front of me. So many of you have seen this. In our first 80 years, from the time when we started back in the 1800s, in that short span of time, we built a fully fledged city. And it's because we understood how to follow the lessons from our predecessors and just did that for the first 80 years. And you can contrast that with the last 80 years. In the last 80 years, we've been conducting a grand experiment, building a city in a totally new way in terms of taking advantage of the new highways that we built and all the cars that we started buying. And it ended up creating the situation where we now have 4 times as much city per person as we used to have. And it's the primary explanation why we struggle to fix our streets, let alone fill our potholes. And you can take that discussion all the way up to the federal level and understand why we have an infrastructure crisis. So that's a challenge. We are billions of dollars behind in just street maintenance. And I haven't talked about any other parts of our infrastructure here in Kansas City. So that's kind of bad news. It's actually really bad news, but there is good news because over the last 20 years, our city leaders have started encouraging reinvestment in our downtown core. And This map was created as part of this discussion that we've started here with Making Great Cities by Joe Menikazi of Urban 3. The Kauffman Foundation funded this study to show us where we're actually creating value in the city and where we're not. And what it highlighted for us all to understand is that the 16 square miles that we call the downtown area all the way to 75th Street are the economic engine of Kansas City. That's the area that generates 20% of our tax revenues. If you add up all the taxes that our city brings in, those 16 square miles, which is about 5% of the city, generate 20% of our revenue. And unfortunately, the rest of the city doesn't generate enough to pay for its maintenance and ongoing servicing. So we're upside down in terms of our portfolio of real estate, which is one of the challenges that we need to address. Now, when you look at this economic engine, most people coming to Kansas City would wonder why it stops so abruptly on the east side, because that development pattern doesn't stop at that line. That development pattern of streets and lots and building stock and housing, all those opportunities continue well east of Troost Avenue. But we all know why that's there, because we've all learned over the last few years in particular about the racist policies and practices in real estate that have caused the east side to not be able to participate in this last 80 years of city building. So we know that. And that's where we're starting these discussions and starting to look at where do we go next. Because now that we can understand the city this way, now that we understand where there's opportunity to build value, and if we pay attention to what's happening already east of Troost, you'll notice that over the last 10 years, there have been a number of new families moving into Troost. Over the last 2 years, there's been a lot of speculation happening east of Troost. And you all know about the inflation that we've seen over the last year in the housing market. You can multiply that by 2, and you're not going to be far off in terms of the impact it's had on real estate east of Troost. And we're not talking about that enough yet, because this is going to happen. That economic engine is going to naturally spread throughout all these communities, east and south of the current economic engine, because it's got the right development pattern. It's got everything going for it that you would want to have in the most vital parts of your city. The only thing that's kept it from happening east of Troost is bad governance and bad policies and bad actions that we all understand now, and we can move beyond. So this is going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's just a matter of when. And we can allow for the residual effects of redlining to continue to keep communities from participating in the wealth building that's going to happen in this part of our city, or we can start acting today and creating policies that are going to allow for those communities to benefit this time around, which would be a great way to end the chapter of redlining history here in Kansas City, if we go down that path. So that's what we're going to focus on here with this fall series. And I hope you're able to join us for all 3 sessions. Tonight, Majora Carter is going to help us see the value of our historically disinvested neighborhoods in a totally new way. And that'll be refreshing and give us a new way to look at all of our communities. Next month, a woman named Tiffany Elders from Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, is going to show us how she and a group of civic leaders in her community have been moving the city of Raleigh-Durham towards a more equitable state. And then our third speaker in October is Doug McCowan. Doug is the Chief Operating Officer of Memphis, which is essentially their city manager. And he's going to show us how a city that's very similar to ours, that's spread out well beyond its original boundaries, and has much greater challenges, frankly, than Kansas City does. But he's going to show you how they are well down the path, well ahead of us in terms of addressing these questions of equity through good policy. So I hope you're able to join us for all 3 of those. But first, let's get into tonight's presentation. Majora Carter is an urban revitalization strategist, a real estate developer, a MacArthur Fellow, a Peabody Award-winning broadcaster, and the owner of the Boogie Down Grind Cafe in the South Bronx of her hometown of the South Bronx. She's been called a public intellectual, a spiritual warrior, and a role model. You're all about to see why. I'm really glad that you all came tonight to learn from her, and let me introduce Majora Carter.
What's up, KCMO? I bring you greetings. I bring you greetings from the South Bronx up in New York City, and I'm super happy to be back here again. This place has changed a lot. I think we were here, we were trying to figure out, but it must have been at least a decade, more than a decade ago, and we're still trying to figure out, like, well, yeah, there's been some change. But anyway, I'm really excited to have you here and to talk with you a little bit about my book, which is basically like my life and our approach and what we do. And but a little bit about the book. I actually put, usually when you have a book that's a nonfiction one, and sometimes it might have like some research and stuff in it. You have the glossary at the end. Well, I put my glossary up in the front because I've used some terms that maybe some folks might not know. So I figured you should know what I'm talking about before you start reading my book. So my glossary is up in the front. Literally, it comes I think right after the table of contents. I haven't looked at my own book in a long time, so I don't really know. But anyway. But one of the things I think for the purposes of this talk that's important to know is the phrase that I use is called low status. And I use it to describe the kind of communities, frankly, that I'm from. So I don't call them poor communities or, underprivileged or even low income, because the word status actually implies something that something is larger at work. That inequality in itself is an established fact. Think of the communities like this near you. Like here it would be Issa Truce. And they're everywhere. They're either inner cities, they can be reservations, they could be white Rust Belt towns, where there was plenty of industry and jobs, but that's long gone. And they're all over the world. They're the places where the schools and the public health and parks and trees, air and water quality, those are the food options, opportunities and access for careers are worse in those areas than they are in other parts of the same town. Now, and you'll often find, at least in many inner cities, like the one I'm from, where you have plenty of government subsidized rental housing, health clinics, homeless shelters, liquor stores, dollar stores. Oh gosh, they predominate. There's like pawn shops and things that charge you to use the money that you actually have. And so, they're the places where inequality actually is assumed by those who live there. And I think, and as well, those that are outside of the community looking in. But really, the inequality is assumed by the people that live there the most. And I think for the purposes of this presentation, those are the people that I'm actually most interested in. So they're the bright kids that are born and raised there. So whether they're, sort of bright stars academically or artistically or athletically, they're the ones that are taught from a very young age that they need to measure success by how far they get away from those communities. Could you imagine a business owner kind of taking the approach that with their own company, the way that it's taken with low status communities? Like, think about it. Successful companies don't invest in talent so that another company can hire them away. They keep their people motivated, and they ask them, through whether it's for, creating the kind of place, where they like hanging out with their coworkers, or their snacks in the break room, or they're just a kind of culture that makes people feel like good things can happen for them. They want to keep these people motivated, their talent motivated to stay with the company so that they actually reinvest their talents into the company and the mission of it. And so I believe that talent retention, the same kind that smart business owners use to keep their talent, can also be used to build great neighborhoods for the people that were born and raised in them. And so, my hometown is a low status community called the South Bronx, and it's the kind of neighborhood that one might say has actually a talent repulsion strategy that's been sort of baked into it. So back in the early 1980s, I walked by this crack house every day when I walked from my house to the subway on the way to get me to what was actually one of the best high schools in the country, the Bronx High School of Science. And it was a really different, from the kind of place that, my when my dad moved to this community, it was a very different place by the time he got there. He was part of the great migration of black folks, escaping domestic terrorism, to move up north in search of greater opportunities. My dad was from Americus, Georgia. My mom was from Sumter, South Carolina. And they moved to what was, at the time, a pretty much almost exclusively white, working class, kind of mixed community, but it was a walk to work community, which meant that many of the folks that lived in the neighborhood actually walked literally to the industrial area where there was plenty of light manufacturing. Like my neighborhood and some major manufacturing, my neighborhood was actually called Little Pittsburgh because there was actually some kind of steel production going on there. So people were psyched, and there were good jobs. Other folks, from down south and also the Caribbean, started coming up, all looking for their greater life, their better life. White flight happened. That was that crazy little phenomena, where actually the real estate industry absolutely was a part, of that kind of structural racism that essentially said, well, if black folks come in, then of course the property values are going to go down, and folks often would follow and leave. The highway construction boom was also happening around that time. And this is a photo of the Cross Bronx in New York City, and the Bronx in particular, where our master builder, that's what he was called, Robert Moses, and every city and state had one, who was essentially in charge of creating, basically making the highway infrastructure that often just destroyed much of the neighborhoods, and of course much of them went through either sort of working class communities as well. And this one is just part of the spaghetti network of highways that really did destroy much of the South Bronx. Redlining happened as well. Even though we know this is a red line, it was often shaded pink or red, which is where the places where banks knew and other financial institutions knew that they were not going to make any kind of investment. And so what happens if you don't do that? Eventually, the places where you would like to, whether it's to build up extra capital to do repairs or whatever, that money just doesn't materialize. So, landlords were doing some other things. We also, because the landlords were, many of the businesses couldn't get financing, many of them moved, whether they went to right-to-work states or overseas, and what took its place was this kind of very burdensome, noxious facilities that came in later. So whether they were waste facilities and power plants, sewage treatment sludge, pelletizing plant, that's a mouthful, things like that would come and concentrate in the community. And that little yellow dot is where literally all of those things were located, within New York City, which is my neighborhood. That's the place I grew up. And yeah, it's around the time I kind of grew up, literally, when these things started to continue. And and I love this photo because I'm sure, actually I totally remember this photo. I was on the phone with Santa Claus, saying that I'm here with the Easter Bunny, and he wants me to tell you that I was a really good girl, so please hook me up. And so that's why, I bring it. But this is what I grew up with. All the years of financial disinvestment, that happened, after the redlining and all the things that happened. And landlords were torching their buildings, literally committing arson because there wasn't any other kind of financial investment coming in. And there was just so much disrepair, and wasn't all arson, but it was enough. But honestly, this is what I grew up in. So that little girl in that picture, this was the kind of thing that I saw for many years happening after, once I became aware, of my neighborhood. And, and seeing these things and knowing that they were, on the nightly news. Like I would literally watch the news with my dad a lot, and and it was as if our neighborhood was we were the poster child for urban blight, like nationally, like soon-to-be presidents would literally make a campaign stop in our neighborhood because we would literally epitomize the worst of cities, and it was like, I'm going to change them, and it was just like, that's my house, and it was just like, it was one of the craziest moments or times within a kid's life to see that on a regular basis. But it's what we dealt with. But what was interesting through all that was that it was still a neighborhood, and there, even though the Bronx lost 60% of its population because of the fires and all of the things that I just told you about before, 60%. But those of us that were stuck there because my dad owned a home, so where else it wasn't worth anything. So where were we going to go? There were plenty of us like that. So that people stuck together. And it was a really interesting thing. And so that level of like love and attention that I got as a kid, were from people in my own neighborhood, and that hasn't changed. There's always been great folks, in any neighborhood, and I'm sure you could all attest to that. Regardless of how bad things can be, there's always the core of a neighborhood as community is not just a place, it's an activity, and people show that kind of care and compassion with each other, I think, especially when things go badly. But again, I was influenced by a lot of really amazing folks, and again, to this day, it still happens, and we've been a community that has produced really awesome folks, whether they're daycare providers or work people that work in film, or entrepreneurs that are doing some really awesome stuff, or medical providers, just really neat people who just are building lives for themselves. Because we've never had a shortage of people, growing up and being produced in communities, in low status communities. But we want to make it clear that that's where they come from. So, like, for example, this young lady on the side with the rose, cozy with my rosé, T-shirt is a woman named Noelle Santos, who started this really crazy, wonderful store, combined her two great loves, wine and books, and it seems very fitting in a library. And so she just opened up a little bookstore called The Lit Bar, as in lit for literature, lit for tipsy, and so it's wildly successful, and it's really, really wonderful. The young man in the top corner, if you're a bunch of foodies, or anybody is, and this is Marcus Samuelson, who's like a celebrity chef, and every now and then pops up in places like ours. The young man in the middle in the bottom is Christian Navarro, and he kind of broke into the movie and TV scene as an actor back in doing the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, and so that he played Tony Romero, and he grew up a couple blocks away from me. His family's still in the neighborhood. So again, these are the folks that are produced in our community. But again, these are often not the kind of things that we hear happening. That these are not the stories that often are told about low status communities, except in terms of people were here, but they don't stay. And why would they, when they could have so much talent to give to someplace else? But the question is, why are we always assuming that people have to leave their communities in order to experience a better one? And so, now I work nationally right now, but the South Bronx is my research and development laboratory, and it always has been. I started working, doing sustainability work starting in the late 90s, and, because it was a real push to think about the fact that our cities and state were looking at us as like the place where you could dump pretty much everything. We were the repository, environmentally, for the type of things that wealthier and whiter communities within New York City could afford to avoid. And it was the time when I didn't really know about that kind of stuff, and I only came back to my neighborhood after college and starting graduate school because I needed a cheap place to stay, which was mommy and daddy's house, and that is the reason why I ended up. But I discovered that this thing that the city and state were doing was literally about to build another huge waste facility on our waterfront. And so it was like when I realized it, so it was good that I did have, because I spent so much time trying to separate myself, from this community and the stain that was attached to me. Because everybody thought people from my neighborhood were like pimps or pushers or prostitutes. And I was like, I'm none of those things, and I don't even want to be associated with it, so I'm going to pretend I'm not from here, and there I'm back. Okay. So, but it was awesome, because that education and that distance actually told me, it's like, oh, this stuff is happening because we do happen to be a poor community of color that's politically vulnerable. Period. And I wasn't thinking about the phrase low status, but that's what we were. And I embodied that, because here I was, it was like the stain that I felt, I was like, yeah, I'm out. But I couldn't look away at that point. So, but I got very involved, in the sustainability, issues around creating a much more sustainable, solid waste management plan. But the super important part was that I did feel that what we needed to do was not just think about like what we needed to, fight against, but what could we fight for? What kind of community did we want to be in? That we were leaving our neighborhoods in order to experience. And I know this doesn't look like much, but it's what we had, at the time. And so we've literally got this notice from, I kept getting these notices, from a woman who was working with the New York City Parks Department, because there was a small grant program that came through the U.S. Forest Service, and they were all trying to work on trying to support threatened rivers around the country in urban areas. And we have this thing called a Bronx River, and I only knew about it because I saw it on a subway map, but I never witnessed it, like on my, because it's like I knew it ran somewhere near my neighborhood, but like I hadn't seen it, certainly not with my own eyes from my neighborhood. And but anyway, at one point, she was like, there's these small grant programs and you could use them for restoration, blah, blah, blah. And, I talk about the story in my book, and that at one point, I went jogging with my dog, who pulled me into what I thought was just another illegal dump in the neighborhood. And it turns out that after going through like literally weeds and piles of garbage that were well over my head, that this dump actually dead-ended at the Bronx River. And if I hadn't, and I didn't look behind me at the time because it was gross, but in front of me was like a 300-foot expanse of water, and it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, and the sunlight was glinting off of it, and it was magic. And I was just like, oh my gosh. So my dog, Xena, didn't get much of a walk that day, but because I went back home and literally started writing that proposal for this little $10,000 seed grant. And we used the grant to buy lunch for volunteers, to pay like my tiny little bit of a salary, which I had. And ultimately, and it was just all about like trying to get this little dump into a state where people could see like, oh wait, there actually could be something going on there. But even though we'd heard from folks how much they would leave the neighborhood in order to experience things like a decent park, we had no real history of park development within our own neighborhoods. I mean, for us, a park was just like, sort of a blacktop, basketball court with like maybe like a broken hoop. And that was pretty much it. So it wasn't that big. People were just sort of like, it can't, if there is something here, it can't be good. So we literally had to work on creating things like programming that happened in the park. And so we did like tons of parties. We actually worked with a group that actually built wooden boats, to get people out on the water. We actually bought a few canoes and just really showed people that there is a river literally right down in our neighborhood that almost nobody knew about. I mean, there was also a parkway called the Bronx River Parkway, so people knew there was something, but that was about it. And this is literally one of my favorite pictures in the world, because as you can see, I'm just posing, because I was like, I've spent 7 years working to get this thing happen. Y'all can do the work right now because I'm done. And I was ready for my close-up. But yeah, so this is when we announced about a $3 million, budget line to transform, that dump, from, this, and believe it, this is after about at least 6 cleanups, because this was before the days of like your camera, your phones, before we had phones, and you couldn't take the document like everything, even stuff that probably doesn't need to be documented. But anyway, so this is what it looked like after 6, and then this was our little beta version. And this is what it looks like now. Yes, so this is the Hunts Point Riverside Park. And it really has become this spot. Where initially it was kind of like, Reba would literally say things like, you sure that's for us? Like, we haven't had anything this nice in the neighborhood, like, ever, for most of our lifetimes, which wasn't not true, but it was just like, yeah, it's ours. Like, this was built with us in mind, like specifically for us. And it's this incredibly, well-used, loved, park. And I got married there back in 2006. Yeah, it's been a while. And that's my dog, my flower girl. And, and it really was just this really remarkable kind of place where it all happened. But creating that was just like one of the most wonderful, places where we realized, like, wait, this could be the place that we can show that we don't have to leave in order to experience nice things in our own community. But unfortunately, the way I believe that the nonprofit industrial complex kind of looks at communities like ours, they're not really taking into account that folks want great things in our neighborhoods. It's almost as if we are expecting that that poverty is part of our culture, and we plan for that, as if there's an expectation that people in our communities will never be anything but that. And so we worked, as a developer, we actually would do needs assessments, and we would ask folks like, what are your hopes and dreams and aspirations for the kind of community that you want to live in? And we in particular asked young people specifically because there was, this was the first time in more than 30 years when we have more kids graduating high school and then going on to college over the past 5 years than we've had in the past 30. So people were like very excited about that. So these were our future, right? And so we would ask them, so what do you think the community needs now? And they would say almost to a person. Well, we need more, affordable housing, for very poor people because, that's all that's here, and homeless shelters because that's pretty much where many of them will end up anyway. We need more health clinics because everybody's got diabetes and obesities and some kind of weird cancers. We need more programs for the kids, so more community centers. And then we remind them, it's so if things go the way that they're looking for you, you're going to be, graduating, going to college, getting a career, are you planning on coming back? And they would literally physically recoil. And it was just they were why would I do that? I'm gonna grow up and be somebody. Why would I want to come back to a place like this? And it spoke volumes, to us because we realized that the way that our community is often looked at, whether it's by the nonprofit industrial complex and even the government, that I think supports it, in those goals, is that poverty is something that is so deeply ingrained in low status communities that is literally what we plan for and work to support. So to manage poverty, not to necessarily help people move out of it, but to manage it. And so to keep people in it so that there's never quite enough to move people up to another's. And so it also kind of made sense in terms of, that the bright ones were encouraged to leave their own communities. Again, do companies do this? No. They don't. They do what they can to keep their talent, to keep it reinvesting. But we don't do that in low status communities. But when we ask people, again, we did those surveys, we did the focus groups, asking people do you think poverty is a cultural attribute? Well, we couldn't really say that because that's a policy wonky thing that you don't really say, and nobody gets that anyway. But we asked them, what are you looking for? And interestingly enough, we were not surprised at all, but they wanted the same things that anybody would want in a cool community. Same thing. Not the things that were readily available in their neighborhoods. Again, we were not surprised. They wanted the cafes. They wanted the restaurants. They wanted the places that made them feel good about where they were. They wanted housing that matched their income because, again, many of the folks in their communities were actually doing things in their lives so that their income was rising. But no one was building the kind of housing that they could afford since they were literally only building very highly subsidized stuff for very, very low income people. So it was even if they wanted to live close to their families, they couldn't because no one was building housing for them. And so they wanted to be, we also got from our survey data was that people wanted to be both inspired by other people in their community and also have the opportunity to inspire others, which I thought was a really beautiful thing, because there was an aspirational thing to the kind of communities that they lived in. And so, but one thing that we realized that when we look at low status communities, there really is only two kinds of development in terms of the way it's developed. So there's either gentrification and displacement, which we see, the neighborhood starts to get better, blah, 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 and then people move, it's sort of planned for people that aren't there right now. And the other kind is what we call poverty level economic maintenance. And it kind of looks, it can look different in different places, but in a lot of them, especially in inner cities, they kind of look a little like this, where you've got, instead of diverse, cool options for food, whether it's, green markets or different grocery stores and, different kinds of dining places, or even good supermarkets, you'll instead find plenty of, greasy spoons, fast food joints, and things like that. You will definitely find places to spend your money, but the question is, do you want to spend your money in those places? Do they make you feel like you're like it's a great place for you to be, or are you happy when you realize that you've got other options that are often not in your own neighborhood? I like a bargain as much as anybody does. I think dollar stores can be super cool. But if it is like the main retail option and you could see several in the same neighborhood, you're probably in a low status community. Pharmacies, you'll see these often dot the landscape. They're the kind of places, it's a multi-billion economic engine in this country. A big part of that balance sheet is literally what happens in low status communities, where you'll find the kind of lifestyle conditions, from diabetes and obesity, the kind of things that are literally determined often by the environment in which you live, by your zip code. And because you'll find that, like, unhealthy food, not great places to walk around. You'll see all sorts of things of that nature. And of course, somebody could make all sorts of money off of it. Liquor stores are another way to get self-medicated. You'll often see plenty of those. If you want to save and invest your money, you probably won't be able to. But you'll find plenty of places that'll charge you the premium for using your own money, whether they're payday loan places or check cashing stores, even rent-a-centers, those kind of places. You'll find that, but you won't find banks or credit unions. And last but definitely not least, very highly subsidized affordable housing, subsidized by the federal government. And so most of the developers that are doing this are not trying to doing it out of the kindness of their hearts. There are big developer fees associated with it, just by building it. And that's the cash. So again, poverty level economic maintenance. That's what this is like. And so before anybody says, and believe me, there are people who will say that, oh my gosh, Majora Carter hates poor people. That's the Majora Carter fan club. That's also something I put in the glossary of my book. Those are my haters. But anyway, because they do love me, I'm sure. But when you add all these things together, what you get is a concentration of poverty. And what we know statistically, when you concentrate poverty, you are concentrating low health outcomes, low educational attainment, higher rates of bad policing, and more incarceration. Statistically, there's more, obviously, poverty and unemployment. And even though I think it could both be qualified and quantified, a lack of hope and a sense of a future that could be great for the people that live there. Those type of things make it so that people feel like they need to move out of their neighborhood in order to live in a better one. But again, what does that mean? And if your only other option, the only other type of development that's happening there is gentrification, people are like, well, those two things, neither one of those things are great, which I understand, but how do you create a better opportunity here, so that people can feel better about where they are? And another thing I want to say is that, when we think about gentrification, I don't believe it starts to happen, the second that, when people start to feel as though, when you start to see things like doggy daycares or cute cafes in people, in places where you didn't see them before. It starts to happen when we don't see the value in our own communities, but somebody else does, as evidenced by these things, which literally were solicitations from predatory speculators that showed up either in my under my door. These are just a small sample of them. I get them literally like every single week, and I get phone calls. People offering to buy my house for cash. Because again, they assume that people in communities, like in low status communities, don't understand the value of those places, because most of the time we don't. We just don't. Because we've not been given an opportunity to understand what that means in terms of how we actually have the capacity in order to support and create the kind of community that makes us feel as though there's someplace that it is the neighborhood that we want to be in. And so I get these things, and it's just sort of crazy pants. And we used to see a lot of these kind of solicitations that were nailed on telephone poles in neighborhoods, and we would just take them down. And so we don't really see them very often at all anymore. But when we saw it, once we posted about it, and this is the kind of attitude that I really want to see more of. Literally, homegirl is just we'll literally have her child call up, the solicitor, the predatory speculator who's trying to buy our house for cash, and just say, get away from my house. This is my inheritance. And it's the kind of thing that the kind of thing that I think we want to see a whole lot more of. But that's why what we're doing is creating, our approach to real estate development is a talent retention strategy. Because we took that, the idea is that you create the right kind of infrastructure that makes people want to stay. They will be reinvesting, not just financially, which is good. You want people to do that, but you also want them to do it like emotionally and spiritually and see value in the place where they're from. And when they do that, then they're literally creating opportunities for them to want to stay. And that's when the aspiration and the inspiration comes in for them as well. But it's like but what does it look like on the real? It's a place where, it's beautiful. You've got both a beautiful natural and built environment. You've got, it's high quality, and again, it makes you feel like it's a good place to be. It's got commercially viable third spaces. And for those, urban planning types out there who are not urban planning types, the third space is a place that's neither work nor home, that gives people an opportunity to get together. They promote community, but not necessarily be a community center. And they allow new opportunities for people to be around in that way. Good quality jobs, lots of local residents, and things of that nature. So remember that place, the crack house that I used to walk by? This is what it is now. It's the Boogie Down Grind Cafe, and that is the, thank you. So we started this, and it's a hip-hop themed coffee shop, because if you didn't know, the South Bronx is the birthplace of hip-hop, and if you didn't know that, you do now. And you're all welcome. And so we open this up as a way for people to kind of hang out and have a great time, being in a space where you had, we could do open mics, people do credit repair workshops. It's a really fun place to be. And so, but interestingly enough for us, just because we put it out there, and even though we knew that coffee is literally like the blackest beverage on the planet, and it comes from like the blackest and brownest part of the world, there were still folks, I think, who were part of sort of like the nonprofit industrial complex, who literally thought that it must just be another form of gentrification. Even though we know that folks who are like from their communities, and I know y'all got some here in Kansas City who are doing some amazing, amazing work, from their own communities doing these things. But again, if it looks like something that's different and you're not prepared to sort of deal with the idea, that things could change for the better for us while we're here, then you get things like this. And so literally we were protested, and I thought that was a really, some of the interest, there were some interesting things that happened. I mean, in terms of, like, they actually had some really good artwork. I was the subject of it, but you kind of have to like the design of some of them. Not these, but there were some other good ones that I was really impressed with. I was like, that's creative. But anyway, but some of it was just mean. But what was interesting was that one of the interesting things that came out of it was that the day that we were being protested was literally the same exact day that we were hosting a workshop that was offering 0% interest loans for home buyers and local home buyers, no, not local home buyers, but homeowners in the community who needed that kind of help. But it was just ironic. And this was one of the very first local investors in the coffee shop. She's Honduran, her husband's Jamaican, and both first generation immigrants, to the community. And they really felt like this is what they want. They were excited about creating new opportunities for themselves as well. This is a former rail station. That was for the architecture geeks. It was designed by Cass Gilbert, one of the first American starchitects, who did the Woolworth building. And we acquired this building, a few years ago. And one of the first things that we did was actually hire a couple, young people from the neighborhood who actually, where it had been vacant for a while, and it got graffitied up, and not the good graffiti, the cool one, but just they designed their own, mural and did it themselves, which was really kind of fun. And so what we're working on it now is that we're transforming it, the original, into an event hall. And so it'll be like one of those awesome third spaces where people will have an opportunity to see how cool, all sorts of things could be in there. And so we did a little sneak peek last year of what it could be, got the temporary permits to assemble, dealt with the Department of Building so that we can actually have folks in it. We did a pop-up, we've been doing pop-up shops, and then, which are basically, it's like what the kids call flea markets now. And Bronx-born actor Malik Yoba, who is he's still doing some work, but now he's like a real estate developer and filmmaker. He did a series called I Build New York, and it was primarily about the history of real estate in New York City, and also the it ended up with a focus on Black and brown developers, and I happened to be in the first episode, so we screened that as well. And then there was a music showcase featuring like alternative rock and hip hop, and it was just like super duper cool. And we're still doing this kind of stuff, and so we're working with a really great architect called Studio V, and this is what it's going to look like. Still just like wide open spaces on the inside, but but maintaining a lot of that beautiful architectural history. And we're actually now on the National Register for Historic Places as well, so I'm very excited about that. And we're also using it as an opportunity for local people to invest into the project as well. So that's super cool about that. Oh, and by the way, that's the reason why my family's in Hunts Point, which is the neighborhood that this is in, is because that was an active rail station for a while, and my dad was a Pullman porter, and he really wanted to work on he did work on the New York New Haven line, and the idea was for him to buy a place on that line, because even though they stopped the rail service, there was some talk that they would reopen it, and so he ended up buying a house in the neighborhood, and even though they never reopened the rails, that's why I'm there. So every time I think about this, I'm just like, Daddy? He's the seventh child of a seventh child, and so am I. It's just so weird, and I love the fact that I'm doing this with him. He's there. I can totally feel him and my mom are just so in that room all the time. But anyway, it's cool. And finally, this is like another example of like how creating opportunities to scale for the kind of community that you want. This was a former juvenile detention facility called Spofford. And it was just like, New York City really did juvenile justice really badly. This was like a warehouse for breaking kids. And it finally got closed down in the early 2010s, and when it was closed, I was like, this is the site, and I was actually able to convince the mayoral administration a few years ago to consider it, as a site for the kind of transformational real estate development, that could just, on a social, environmental, and economic level, could just be amazing for the community. And so we talked about, having it be used for mixed income housing and mixed use commercial development, and really creating the kind of being really forward thinking about what were the opportunities for, training and manufacturing and local economic development, and really being focused on where the jobs and local business opportunities were coming from, focusing on really excellent public space, which we know is a great democratizer, especially when it's done well, and really also thinking about like a local and living and circular economy in terms of creating commercial and retail spaces, so the dollars could circulate throughout the community. But also we knew that the model that we were creating actually could be applicable in many other post-industrial cities around the country that had the same kind of topography, where you've got a residential area, and an industrial area, and then they kind of meet in the middle, but that little weird place in the middle is where kind of like nothing really happens. So it's an opportunity to build something great. Because like here, in this instance, in my neighborhood, it was like the jail on one side, that's residential, and then on the other side, and you saw it in the quality of the type of businesses that were there. One was like an illegal parking lot, a truck engine rebuilding lot, definitely a lot of like illegal chop shops, like auto shops. But really, what everybody in the neighborhood knew this place was used for was the kind of things that where truckers would go and pick up a prostitute. Like, everybody knew that. But imagine, changing the ground plane there completely, where there's entrances to businesses that actually have operated with 3 shifts, that there's entrances to schools and to homes and to businesses as well. That could be the kind of thing that would just like totally change everything about that. And our thing was like, we're not trying to like do like a cute project, because we see that in a lot of like low status communities, where you do like one nice project and then nothing else happens. And then it's just like, and then of course that one would fail. Like, no, we were like, we need to use that to raise the bar for what passes for development in low status communities, period. And so it had to be big. And so we were super excited, and I was so excited. I literally led a team that had more women and more, people of color, developers, as equity partners, on the development, of this plan. And it included about a total of 1,200 units of housing, including 100 units low-income home ownership. in that case, I will use low income, because these were low income people who were going to become homeowners. About, then a mix of affordability, so a range of affordability, because I think we believe in like economic diversity, and more than 200,000 square feet of economic development that include light industrial and residential, light industrial, commercial, cultural space, and just retail, and literally that would have created about 800 jobs. And we were so excited about it, and we were just like, okay, if we don't win this bid, then at least somebody, who's going to be better than we are, which we were like, I don't know if that's possible, but but literally that's like how cocky I was. I was like, of course they're going to want something this good. I mean, we've never had anything like this in New York City, ever. Our city decided to do the typical kind of status quo development. And so they gave the winning bid. The winning bid was actually a team that consisted of 2 all-white male development teams. And they built a complex that included all low-income housing, 100%. And no real economic development, but it did have a health clinic and a community center. And that's it. And so this is one of my favorite quotes in the world. And it's from a letter from a Birmingham jail. And all it speaks to is how important it is for us to be impatient with the status quo. Because we know how we got here. We know. We could talk more about a whole list of things that the Security Exchange Commission could do and philanthropy can do in order to create real value in low status communities, so that people are a part of the change that will benefit them in the future, long term. But ultimately, this is about creating the kind of communities where people feel as though there's the lifestyle infrastructure, where there's the kind of quality of life that make folks feel as though they don't have to move out of their neighborhoods in order to live in a better one. It's possible. And I know many of you are doing it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Carter, and we would love to hear from all of you at home or here in the audience if you have questions. If you do have a question and you're here in the audience, step up to the microphone so people at home can hear what you have to say or ask, and make sure you have a well-formed question. And if you're at home and on YouTube, then please put your questions in the chat and I will read them. And don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
We're all friends here.
I don't bite unless provoked. And even then, I was just like, you just can't do that these days. No.
Hello.
Hi.
Our east side of town is being depopulated by people of color who are moving south into a poor suburban area, and it's getting poorer because black people are moving into it and white people are disinvesting. So we are opening up an area which is going to relatively soon, actually they showed it on the map and I kind of didn't know whether to laugh or cry about it on that map they showed, that's going to be available for development. How do we convince the powers that be that this is not a better way? It seems like what I see is the concept of pushing dust around, except the dust is black bodies. There's a problem we've got here in this city, and we're 10 years behind everywhere else, which I love for a lot of reasons, okay? So we have an opportunity, but we need some people to step in the breach here and stop bleeding to the south into the suburbs and keep our midtown strong.
So there's sprawl. Is that what you're...
No, it's really chasing black people out of an area that white people want to inhabit, honestly, in my opinion.
So I guess I want to make sure that I understand, because again, I'm not understanding all the geography. Like I know roughly some of it, but so are you, just so that I'm clear, are you saying that there's folks who are being pushed out, or are they going on their own some?
If the value of your property increases so that your property taxes and insurance are higher, but you can look down the road 15 miles to the south and
they'll go there. Wow.
does that make sense?
That makes sense. Okay.
Okay, so we have that going on in this city right now, and it can be stopped. But we need to have people, in particular white people, I think, wake up to the reality that that's going on.
You know, yeah, I mean, there's always something, no matter where you go, in whatever city, whatever town you're in. And, you know, and so that's why it really, like a really important piece is that folks are understanding the kind of opportunities that exist for them to be able to stay where they are if they want to. And there's things to access. Like honestly, I just learned today about some amazing kind of project where there's a law on the books here in Kansas City that allows you to, if you do $5,000 worth of property repairs, that you get a 10-year tax abatement. Your taxes freeze for 10 years, which I thought was like a really kind of creative policy measure.
It's a great idea, but downtown where all those apartments that they have built that are all brand new, that are, you know, bringing in white people again from the suburbs, they have 25-year tax abatements.
Oh. That's a problem.
Right?
Wow.
Okay.
That is so then that would be the kind of thing, honestly, you know, as a white person or just in general, those are the type of things that people need to be like talking about more. Because was my understanding, because I find often is that there's not that the kind of talk that actually even gets those type of information out to our, whether it's our elected and from a policy perspective, like that's some craziness. And obviously I'm from New York where things are just as crazy, but talking about them and pushing them so that it's clear, like this stuff is not okay.
Right. What I'm saying is we're 10 years behind the times for
Right.
most places, and I love that. But we need to be 10 years further ahead in the way we're dealing with
Agreed.
this.
Thank you, sir. We've got another question right here. Go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. One of your tenants, I think, was beauty. Could you further elaborate on beauty? Because I think flowers and trees, but we have street art. We also have aesthetically pleasing buildings. So beauty. So please elaborate on that. And then how best to kickstart that at different levels of scale, neighborhood scale, government, charities, or private business.
Yeah, I mean, beauty is just, it's in the eye of the beholder, but ultimately it's the kind of things that make people feel as though, like looking at a spot makes them feel like, not like they want to shy away from it. So it could be public art, it can be flowers, it can be trees, it could be a well taken care of house. You know, it could be the kind of business where, you know, it's clear people care about it. You know, and it's, you know, it's the kind of thing, like one of the things that we like, you know, often pay attention to is like, you know, I do wonder why, even though we know that, you know, having like a cool third space, you know, whether it's a cafe, you know, why don't we say things like, why isn't philanthropy actually subsidizing stuff like that? Because we know people would rather go to a place like that than often some of the community centers that folks keep funding, but I don't know of anybody who's like left, you know, a low status community to go to someplace else for things like community centers or health clinics or the kind of things one finds there. They go to the places where the things that they want to visit are not in those neighborhoods. So that's what beauty is.
And the best way to kickstart, is it the local residents there that kickstart the program and just clean up areas like you did with your park? Is that local as well?
That is like literally getting like the kind of work that we did, whether it was at the park, but also like recognizing that is there support to start some local businesses. You know, those type of things that is how we kickstart it. Like honestly, my building, the cafe, just as like a person of color from our own community, people were like thought about like, wait, I can do this in my own community. It was just the act of having someone physically like them, thinking, wait, I don't have to go someplace else to do this. I can start it right here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, ma'am.
Ms. Carter, I want to say first, thank you for being here. You're a breath of fresh air for me. I want to make mention too that I am a East Side Kansas City resident, 4th generation. My great grandmother's home, which was bought in the 1950s, is still there in our family to today.
Oh,
The
amen.
unfortunate thing is that we are only one of 3 families that occupy an entire block in the East Side of Kansas City.
Wow.
We have been approached numerous of times by multiple developers offering us just $20,000 to get our home, and that's an absolute no.
Of course.
What I have run into is I want to redevelop my area. What I've run into is the word tokenism. Tokenism. Okay. So I want to know how you've been, have you experienced that, and how do you approach that? I took that as if my knowledge, my experience as a real estate broker and investor and business owner was not taken seriously. And then I also recognize too that there is what we call a political system within our community that purposely does things in our neighborhoods that kind of keep things as the status quo.
Yeah.
But then also to understanding that being 10 years behind also really means we're 20 years behind because we have that much further to catch up to. And so what I'm looking to build is something for my children. And so what my question for you is, how did you kind of overcome that experience as tokenism, which also involves the government entities, the professionals in the development world, but also your own community that doesn't take you seriously when you approach those rooms to try to do something different?
Well, you know, you do realize nobody'd be saying anything if you weren't doing anything. So take that, number one, and enjoy it because you are. So, and the thing is, you know, I think, well then, yes, it all, honestly, I think it all comes from white supremacy, where you've got folks from, you know, whether they're government, who are sort of like looking at these communities, and especially, frankly, people of color, and who just like, there's a way you're supposed to be, and that's not it. And then, and it's such an effective tool that even within our own communities, like we look at folks who are striving to create better for our communities, who are just sort of like, you're not supposed to do that. There were consequences for that. Sticking your neck up like that. So all I could say is that, you know, when you know that, and you know that, you do, is just recognize that, you know, we've had 400 years of going through this. And it's gonna take some time to get it out. And the fact that you're like staying in your power and still doing it, that's all you can do. And I'm going to encourage you to take care of yourself, because it's not going to get any easier. But there will be so many beautiful victories where you'll forget about like all the crap that you went through. And it's just like, seriously, you will forget, because you will see the benefits of how people are being benefited by the work you're doing. And that's really, honestly, that's all I could seriously tell you. Because it's not like you're going to stop doing it. Right? So,
Thank you.
enjoy the ride.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, sir.
Hi.
I was born in the 1950s, and our education system back then, we had doctors, lawyers, dentists, teachers, all lived in the neighborhood. And
Move the mic up so you don't have to bend down so far.
No.
There you go.
And if they saw a kid that had special abilities, they'd take them under their wing, give them a job, you know, coach them for an hour a day or whatever. But now, in Kansas City, Missouri, our high school system only has 12,000 kids in it, and we're almost 450,000 people, and they're all charter schools or magnets or whatever. And most of the kids that's in the public schools have teachers that aren't much more than 5 or 10 years older than them. And I don't want to say they're dumb as a rock, but you know, they don't have any experience.
Well, they don't have the experience, exactly.
And
exactly.
they can't help the kids because they don't know.
Okay.
And my question is, how are we going to fix it so that We can have community schools with good educators. Even the universities don't even have people with doctors and tenure no more.
Yeah.
So, you
Yeah.
know, we're dumbing this down so bad that how are we going to survive it?
Yeah, I think you're speaking to sort of like a larger, issue that, often, I think back in the 50s when we were actually racially segregated, but much more, economically diverse in terms of, communities that we lived in. And I think that was one of the unintended consequences of integration, where, you did have, people of different income levels and professional abilities all living in the same area. So again, racially segregated, but diverse economically and professionally, so that it was just like people were, that kind of integration was what created much more social cohesion that ultimately supported people from those communities. So whether it was a struggling kid, who an experienced teacher who was actually also living in the same area, they could do that. And so I do believe that if we have more of a talent retention approach to community developments, especially, in low status communities, we will, just by virtue of having more people of diverse backgrounds around, we will be creating more stability that will support young people in particular, who actually are getting the short end of the stick, educationally, because there's just not, because I think the way that the nonprofit industrial complex kind of looks at those communities, that's what those communities get. And I feel like we've got to get to the point where we can move out of that. And I think that's what the talent retention strategy is all about.
We'll take one more audience question here, and then I've got one from home,
Oh, okay.
and then we would love if you would sign some books for us.
Absolutely.
All right, go ahead, ma'am.
Hi. Were you successful in getting people to stay in the neighborhood, or the talent of the kids who left to come back? Because that's a difficulty that I see in Kansas City. It's getting young black people, my daughter included, who's in Atlanta, went to D.C., now she's in Atlanta, flourishing, doesn't seem to see Kansas City big enough for her talent. So I'd just like to hear about your success in getting people to stay and or move back, and how you did that.
What has been literally one of the, where's the young lady who asked the other question? I'm not sure where you went, but it really has been one of the most wonderful parts of it, despite how hard everything can be. When I get to see someone who literally, tells me to my face that it was the example that we had that actually made them keep their families home, or decide that they were going to stay and build in their own community, in our community. Yes, it has changed. And I feel like, and that's really why I wrote the book, because I wanted people to realize that it is going to take us. It's not going to take all of us, but it's going to take some of us who decide to make that leap. And it is a hard thing, and I'm not going to throw any shade at your daughter, because I'm sure she's living her best life. Is I see her mama, so I'm like, I know she knows how to do that. So that's clear. But but the thing is, there will have to be someone who make the first leap, and it is hard. Again, I'm not going to. I don't know if I'd wish what I went through on anybody. I'm not going to lie. Or what I go through. I still go through it. But and I can laugh about it, because I'm just like, it's going to be fine. But listen, I think just give it a chance. Let me tell you, this town has some amazing people.
Yes.
And they are not, literally, my people, who I'm just like, oh my gosh, your daughter might be coming home sooner than you think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And we've got one question from someone watching at home, and then we'll say it's a wrap. Have you heard from any of your original haters who have realized or benefited from the change you're driving? What is it that made them think differently?
That's an awesome question. And I'm like, yes, actually, oh my gosh. it's a beautiful story. It's a nice way to close. So there was actually a group. So I don't use gender pronouns when I talk about the Majora Carter fan club, because it could be anybody. And but there was actually a group that I talked about or actually a person that I talked about within the in the book, and who did not a very nice thing, and this person ran a community-based organization for young kids, and I found out just recently that part of what they did was sort of use me as an example of what's wrong with the neighborhood, literally, like my name, like me, that's where she lives, like this is the person who's gentrifying our neighborhood, and she's just bad. And so now some of those young people are in their mid-20s, and so one of them, literally, and it happened not very long ago, came up to me because the person was hanging out at the cafe, and I had no idea like who this guy was and what his history was, and he was just like, I've got to talk to you, and I was just like, what? And he told me that I was used as the model of like everything wrong in my neighborhood, and he's just like, I'm so angry about it. Because you're actually, and you have been doing everything that you possibly could to make our community better. And I feel like I've been lied to, and I'm really pissed, and I'm gonna make it my business to share with other people like that we were lied to. That this whole nonprofit thing is like, it was as if they were trying to keep us down, and here you are trying to lift us up, and no one gave you, these folks didn't give you credit for it. And so he works with us at the rail station now. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. Please join us out in the lobby for the signing.
Sure.
Thank you all for coming.
I'll be right there.